He didn't ask for permission. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't wait for silence. Ethan Carter walked straight to the center of the ballroom, reached into his jacket, and dropped a manila envelope onto Victoria Blackwell's table so hard that 5 champagne glasses shook. The music stopped. 500 people stopped breathing. And Ethan, a man these people had spent years looking through like he was made of air, looked Victoria Blackwell dead in the eyes and said, "Every number in that envelope is a body that hasn't fallen yet. You want to keep this quiet. You're already too late." She had called him just a poor, single dad. She had no idea what she'd woken up. What city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you believe that quiet men are sometimes the most dangerous ones, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because we are just getting started. He almost didn't step forward. That's the part nobody talks about, the half second before a man decides who he is. The moment where the easier choice is right there, clean and available, and all you have to do is keep walking. Keep your eyes forward. Keep carrying the tray. Ethan Carter had been carrying the tray for 14 months. He knew the geometry of this room, the way a sailor knows water, not because he loved it, but because survival requires it. He knew which tables tipped and which ones didn't. He knew that the man in the corner by the east window, Gerald Fitch, CFO of Bridgemont Capital, had never once made eye contact with him in 14 months. Not once. Not even by accident. Ethan had tested it quietly the way a man with a precise mind tests things direct line of sight 3 seconds nothing. To Gerald Fitch. Ethan Carter did not exist. He was a function. A tray that moved. That was fine. That was the job. The Grand Meridian Club existed in a specific layer of New York where money had aged long enough to stop feeling the need to announce itself. No velvet ropes. No bouncers with earpieces. Just a certain quality of silence in the carpets, a certain weight to the silverware, a certain practiced ease in the way the guests wore their wealth like a second skin they'd been born into and never once questioned. Tonight was the Manhattan Corporate Excellence Foundation Gala, which was, as best as Ethan had ever been able to determine, an annual event where billionaires handed each other awards for being billionaires and photographers documented the exchange so that posterity would understand how generous the powerful could be when the audience was sufficient. He was moving a tray of champagne toward the east corridor when the silence dropped. Not a loud silence. Not a crash and shatter silence. Something more surgical, a hush that spread outward from one spot near the private dining entrance like a ripple moving away from a stone. The kind of quiet that tells you something is happening that everyone can see and nobody intends to stop. Ethan turned. 20 feet away, Victoria Blackwell was standing over a boy named Marcus. Marcus was 19. He worked the Tuesday night corridor, plates, bread stations, whatever needed moving. 3 weeks earlier, during a 10-minute break in the service alcove, he'd told Ethan he was saving money for community college. Business administration, maybe. He'd said it with the particular combination of determination and uncertainty that belongs specifically to 19-year-olds who are trying to build something out of nothing and haven't yet learned to pretend otherwise. He had spilled something, a ramekin maybe, a small dish of sauce. A splash, the kind of thing that happens when human beings carry things through crowded rooms, which is to say, the kind of thing that is an occupational inevitability, and not by any reasonable measure, a catastrophe. It had caught the hem of Victoria Blackwell's dress. And Victoria Blackwell was not treating it like an occupational inevitability. "Do you have any idea?" she said, and her voice was low, which was the first sign that this was going to be bad. Because loud is anger, but low is intention, what this dress cost. Marcus had a napkin in his hand. His arm was still half extended from whatever motion had preceded the spill. He looked like a photograph of a person frozen between 1 second and the next. 19 years old, and suddenly very aware of exactly how small he was in this room. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to..." Don't. She said it cleanly. One syllable. Like hanging up a phone. Don't apologize to me. Apologies are for people who made a mistake once. You being in this room at all is the mistake. Someone near the east window shifted slightly. The careful, imperceptible shuffle of people who want to witness something without being accountable for witnessing it. Ethan recognized the movement. He'd seen it before in other rooms, in other lives. I genuinely don't understand, Victoria continued, and now her voice had shifted into something almost conversational, light, almost curious, which was somehow the cruelest possible register. How a person with this level of basic incompetence gets placed in a room with things that matter. Who made that call? I want to understand the decision-making process. Marcus's jaw was working. He was trying to locate the professional response, the one that existed somewhere between total submission and the kind of truth he couldn't afford to tell. He was searching for the script that would make this stop. There was no such script. Ethan knew that. He'd looked for it himself in a different room 6 years ago and found the same empty air. He set down his tray. The decision happened somewhere below thought. It wasn't brave exactly, or if it was the specific bravery of a man who has already lost most of what he was afraid to lose, which is a different thing from courage, more like clarity. His body simply moved. 4 steps, 5. And then he was standing beside Marcus, and the geometry of the scene had changed. Ms. Blackwell. His voice was level. Not loud, not deferential, just present. The way a wall is present. Victoria Blackwell turned to look at him. Her eyes moved over him in a quarter second, the fast categorical scan of someone who processes service workers the way other people process background noise. Up-down categorized, filed. The fault is mine, Ethan said. I came around the corridor corner too fast and bumped his tray. He didn't have time to compensate. I've already spoken to the floor manager. Your dress will be taken care of tonight, and the full cleaning cost is on us. It was a lie constructed so cleanly that it left no fingerprints. Everyone within earshot knew it was a lie. The geometry was wrong. Marcus had spilled nowhere near a corridor, and this man had arrived from the opposite direction. But a clean lie delivered with complete steadiness has a weight to it that the truth delivered badly sometimes can't match. And Ethan delivered it the way he did everything else, with his entire attention and not one unnecessary word. Victoria Blackwell looked at him. 3 seconds passed. In a room like this, at a moment like this, 3 seconds is a long time. Then the laugh came. Then the kickshaw. It came from the Bridgemont table. Gerald Fitch's orbit, 2 or 3 men in suits who had seen the whole thing and arrived at the version of it that made the most sense to them. The waiter was inserting himself into something which was funny. The waiter was attempting to exist on the same plane as Victoria Blackwell, which was funnier. Is that the... A woman's voice somewhere behind Ethan's shoulder. Is the waiter actually... Ethan. James, the floor manager, materializing at the edge of the crowd, with his face arranged into something between professional alarm and private plea. Ethan, let's just... I know who you are. Victoria said it quietly, and the noise around her dropped away. She was still looking at him with that same focused precision, but the dismissal was gone from it, now replaced by something that was harder to name, the attention of a person recalibrating, adjusting their estimate of a variable they'd already accounted for and filed away. 14 months on the floor here. Table service, event circuit, fill in wherever they're short. A small pause. Single father. Daughter 8 years old. You live in the Ridgeway building on 4th. She said it the way a chess player announces the position of a piece, not cruelly, not warmly. Factually. With the particular ease of someone who keeps information on everyone within radius of them, because information is the cleanest form of leverage. I make a point of knowing the people who handle my food. Ethan said nothing. You've made an error tonight, Victoria said. And all the lightness was gone now. What remained was flat and certain, and entirely without heat, which was somehow more serious than heat. A meaningful one. I'd think carefully if I were you about what the next several months of your life need to look like." She turned back to the room, smooth, complete, a page turning. The conversation around her restarted like an engine catching. Marcus exhaled beside Ethan, a long, shaking breath, the kind that's been held so long it's become structural. "Man," he whispered, "what did you just do?" Ethan picked up his tray. "Go finish your section," he said quietly. "Don't give her another look." James gave him the formal warning in a back office with a metal desk and a wall calendar from the previous year. Appropriate professional boundaries. Disruption of guest experience. Note in the file. Ethan listened. He said the right things. He went back to the floor for the remaining 40 minutes of his shift. He drove home at 1:20 a.m. Emma was 2 floors up at Mrs. Delgado's apartment, asleep on the pull-out sofa, the way she always was on his late nights. He let himself into his own place quietly and stood in the kitchen in the dark for a moment before turning on the light above the stove, just that one, just enough. Hey. The apartment was small. Not in a way that felt like failure, or at least Ethan had made a private decision years ago to stop letting it feel that way. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator in 3 overlapping layers, a rotating gallery that she curated with complete editorial authority. The bookshelf against the wall held her picture books and his old professional texts side by side. No organizational principle. Fully mixed Charlotte's Web leaning against a graduate-level forensic accounting manual. Goodnight Moon, next to a federal securities law reference he'd once used to prepare testimony. He looked at that shelf. He made a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table and thought about Victoria Blackwell's voice. The next several months of your life. Then he thought about what his life had looked like once before someone else decided what it would become. 6 years ago, Ethan Carter had been a forensic accountant at Meridian Advisory. Different Meridian. The city was full of these overlapping names, as if money kept recycling its own vocabulary. He had been good at it. Not in the way people say good to be polite, specifically, precisely, measurably good. The kind of good that gets you moved onto accounts where the numbers are complicated and the stakes are real. He had a particular ability, not just to read what the numbers said, anyone with training could do that, but to hear what they weren't saying. The gaps. The missing weight. The column that adds correctly on its face, but breathes wrong when you hold it up to light. That ability had found something 6 years ago inside an audit of a mid-size procurement firm that had contracts with 3 major infrastructure projects. He hadn't been assigned to look deeply. He'd looked anyway, because the numbers were breathing wrong and he could not unhear it. What he found was clean and ugly. Falsified vendor certifications, procurement records that describe materials never actually delivered payments, routing through shells to somewhere they never fully arrived. Money moving in the specific patterns that only make sense once you understand that the company's stated purpose is not its actual one. He did everything correctly. He documented. He went to his superiors. His superiors told him he was misreading the data. He went to the SEC. He cooperated with federal investigators. He eventually spoke to a journalist because the regulatory process had stalled in ways he couldn't prove, but could feel in his chest at 3 a.m. The company then spent 18 months and resources that dwarfed anything Ethan had access to, turning him into the story. His methodology was imprecise, they said. His motivations were personal, they said. The journalist's piece ran, but the headline read, "Controversial Allegations," rather than "Documented Fraud," because by then the narrative had been muddied with enough strategic noise that the truth was technically present in the room, but somehow couldn't be heard clearly. And the company settled a collateral charge, paid a fine that represented less than a month of operational profit, and continued operating. Ethan lost his position, then his firm, then his clients, then his marriage, though that last one he understood had been struggling under its own structural weight long before any of this. Carol had her own accounting to do, and the numbers of their life together had been wrong in quieter ways for a long time. She'd moved to Portland. They'd agreed on Emma during the school year, with Ethan summers with Carol. Emma had been 2 years old when the world came apart. She had no memory of any version of her father except this one. The one who packed her lunch and checked her homework and showed up every single day even when showing up was the hardest possible option. He had rebuilt what he could. Consulting gigs that didn't last. Teaching that didn't fit. The waiter job had started as a bridge between two other things, a stopgap 3 months maximum, just until something else resolved. The stopgap had become 14 months without ever announcing the transition. He sat at the kitchen table. He thought about Marcus, 19 years old, arm still half extended, searching for the words that would make it stop. Mush. He thought about the way that search had felt. He knew that search from the inside. He went to bed. The call came 4 days later on a Thursday during his afternoon break in the service alley behind the club. He was standing with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in his hand. He'd stopped noticing when that happened somewhere around month 8, when his phone showed a number he didn't have. He answered, "Mr. Carter?" The voice was unhurried, older, the specific quality of patience that belongs to men who have long since stopped needing anything urgently. "My name is Alexander Sterling. I was at the Meridian Gala Tuesday evening. I'd like to meet with you." "About what?" "About the fact that you're one of the 3 best forensic minds this city has produced in the last 20 years, Sterling said, "and you're currently carrying other people's glasses." Ethan looked at the brick wall across the alley. "I'm going to need more than that." "Of course you are. Meet me in person, an hour of your time. If you decide it's nothing, I won't contact you again." He looked Sterling up that night. The search took 10 minutes and clarified most of it. Sterling. Capital Diversified Technology Infrastructure. Strategic Acquisition. Net assets somewhere in the range of $4 billion by the last public figure, which meant the real number was probably higher. More importantly, no visible overlap with the Blackwell orbit. In a financial ecosystem where everyone's money touched everyone else's at enough removes, Sterling had managed to maintain a notable distance from the Blackwell family specifically. That in itself was a kind of information. They met at a coffee shop, which itself was a piece of information. Not a private room, not a members-only floor, not somewhere with a name. A regular coffee shop in Midtown with mismatched chairs and a line of people in running clothes waiting for oat milk lattes. Sterling was already seated when Ethan arrived, black coffee in front of him, a newspaper folded on the table that he clearly hadn't been reading. He stood when Ethan approached. Handshake brief, direct, the kind that communicates rather than performs. "Thank you for coming. You said you had something specific." Ethan sat. "I work better with specific." "Yes," Sterling said. Something that was almost a smile moved across his face and settled. "I'd heard that." "What did you hear exactly?" "I'm a waiter. You were a forensic accountant who found a sophisticated multi-year procurement fraud, documented it thoroughly, pursued every legitimate channel, and got systematically destroyed for being correct." Sterling said it without editorializing. Just the facts of it laid flat. "You were right about everything. The truth was in the room. It didn't matter." Ethan said nothing. "I have a problem," Sterling continued. "Blackwell Industries closes a merger with my primary strategic partner, ClearPath Infrastructure, in approximately 6 weeks. My due diligence team has cleared it. The numbers on paper work." He paused. "But I have a feeling." "What kind of feeling?" "The kind that wakes you up at 4 in the morning because something in the structure is wrong and you can't locate the wrongness yet." He turned his coffee cup once on the table. "My team is good, but they're looking for the things that due diligence teams look for. I need someone who knows specifically how these things are hidden. Someone who has been inside one of these structures and survived it." He looked at Ethan directly. "What I think is inside Blackwell's supply chain is not just fraud. I think there are falsified structural certifications, steel components, building materials. Things that go into projects where people live and work. Things where, if the falsification runs as deep as I suspect, the eventual failure won't be financial." The coffee shop continued its noise around them. "People die," Ethan said. "Yes." He looked at the table. What do you need from me? Access to Blackwell's documentation comes through me legitimately merger partner, standard review process. You analyze what I bring you. You tell me what your team doesn't see. And if I find it, then we take it somewhere it can't be buried. Federal investigators who aren't connected to the Blackwell donor network. Independent journalists with the resources to publish before an injunction can land. We build it so complete that there is no room to muddy it. He said the last word without emphasis, but he was watching Ethan when he said it. Ethan felt that word land. Muddy. Sheol. He'd spent 6 years carrying that word around. The specific texture of a truth that was technically present and somehow still lost. He knew what it weighed. I have a daughter, Ethan said. 8 years old. She is not part of whatever this is. Understood, fully. I mean it. The moment anything near her, you stop. Immediately. No questions asked, no pressure from me. Sterling said it without hesitation or performance. Mr. Carter, I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. I'm asking you to do the specific work that you happen to be better at than anyone I can hire. Everything else is mine to manage. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, measuring, the way you measure a number that looks right but needs to be verified. Then he said, "Show me what you have." Sterling reached into the bag at his feet and placed a folder on the table between them. Ethan opened it. The numbers were right there, clean on the surface, correct in all the ways that a casual reading would confirm. But underneath in the spacing between the columns and the specific weight of certain zeros, something was breathing wrong. He could hear it immediately. He turned the page. His eyes moved fast and then slowed, the way they always slowed when the thing he was looking for was actually present. A particular stillness came over him. The stillness of a man who has just found the exact shape of what he'd been sensing. He turned another page. There it was. Not all of it, not yet, but the edge of it. The first thread of a thing that if you pulled it correctly would unravel something very large and very deliberately hidden. Ethan Carter had not felt like himself in 6 years. He felt like himself now. 3 blocks away, a black car sat at the corner of 52nd and 6th. The driver had been there for 9 minutes. At 4:47 p.m., he sent a text to a number that routed through a relay server in New Jersey before reaching its destination. The message was 4 words. He met with Sterling. The reply came back in 40 seconds. Watch the little girl. The folder stayed on Ethan's kitchen table that night. He didn't touch it until Emma was asleep. That was the rule he'd made for himself. Whatever this was, whatever it was going to become, it did not exist in the hours that belonged to her. So he made her dinner pasta with the specific amount of butter she required, and not 1 gram more. And he sat across from her while she told him about a girl in her class named Sophie, who had announced that morning that horses were smarter than dogs, and how the class had divided almost immediately into 2 factions, and how Emma herself had declined to take a side, because as she explained to Ethan with considerable gravity, she did not have enough data. That's very reasonable, Ethan said. I know, Emma said. Sophie was mad about it, though. People who are very certain about things sometimes get mad when other people want more information. Emma considered this while twisting pasta around her fork. Is that why some people don't like you? He looked at her. What do you mean? Mrs. Delgado said you used to have a different job, and some people got mad at you for it. She looked up. Was it because you wanted more information? He was quiet for a moment. Something like that, he said. Did you find it? I found it, he said. The information was there. So why did they get mad? He thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest, without being a weight she needed to carry. Because sometimes the truth is something that certain people have spent a lot of time and money keeping quiet, he said. And when someone finds it anyway, those people get scared. And scared people do things that aren't fair. Emma nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was filing something for later. Then she went back to her pasta. Sophie will come around, she said. About the horses and dogs thing. I'm going to find actual research. That's my girl, Ethan said. He did the dishes. He read to her for 20 minutes. They were 3/4 through a book about a girl who discovers her grandmother had been a codebreaker in World War II, which Emma had chosen herself, and which Ethan found quietly devastating in ways he didn't examine too closely. He turned off her light at 8:30. He stood in the hallway outside her door for a few seconds, listening to the specific quality of silence that meant she was actually going to sleep and not conducting further private research under the covers with a flashlight. Then he went to the kitchen table and opened the folder. He worked for 4 hours without stopping. By midnight, he had filled 6 pages of a yellow legal pad with notes in his tight, precise handwriting. Not conclusions, yet not accusations, just questions. The specific kind of questions that a certain type of number asks when you know how to listen. A procurement sub-account that appeared in Q3 filings but had no corresponding vendor registration. A series of material certifications for structural steel delivered to 3 separate Blackwell construction projects, all certified by the same third-party testing firm. A firm that, when Ethan ran the registration number, turned out to have been dissolved 14 months before the certifications were dated. Steel certified by a company that no longer existed for buildings that were currently occupied. Base. He set down his pen. He sat back. His hands were steady. His mind was very quiet, the way it got when something large and serious came fully into focus. Not loud, not panicked, just clear. The specific clarity of a man who has seen this shape before in a different room and knows exactly what it means and exactly what it costs to say so. He picked up his phone and sent Sterling a single text. The firm that certified the steel on the Harbor Point project. Find me everything you can about who owned it before dissolution. I need it by morning. Sterling replied in 4 minutes, which meant he'd been awake, already pulling it. What did you find? Ethan typed, enough to know this goes deeper than procurement fraud. Call me at 6. Yeah. He closed the folder. He turned off the kitchen light. He stood in the dark for a moment and listened to the building around him. The pipes, the distant sound of the street, the small sounds of a city that never fully sleeps. Someone had certified dead steel for living buildings. And someone had made sure no one would look closely enough to find it. Until now. What? Sterling called at 5:58. The testing firm, he said without preamble. Consolidated Materials Verification, LLC. Registered in Delaware, dissolved 16 months ago. The sole registered agent was a man named Paul Greer. Greer's last known employment before the shell company was Blackwell Industries, Procurement Division. He left Blackwell in 2019 with a severance package that was, by any standard, extraordinarily generous for his level. Hush money dressed as severance, Ethan said. That would be my read. Who was his direct supervisor at Blackwell? A pause. Papers moving. A VP of operations named Daniel Marsh, who currently reports directly to Victoria, Ethan said. Yes. He looked at the legal pad in front of him. 6 pages of questions that were beginning to answer themselves. This isn't just about the merger, Sterling. You understand that. I know. The Harbor Point project has been occupied for 2 years. There are families in that building. If the structural steel is substandard... I know, Sterling said again, and his voice was different now, quieter, heavier. That's why I came to you. My team found a discrepancy and flagged it as a financial risk to the merger. I looked at it and understood it was something else entirely. He paused. How long do we have before this needs to move? Depends on how many other projects are in the same chain. Ethan flipped back through his notes. I found 3. I think there are more. I need the full list of Blackwell construction projects from 2018 to present every material certification on record and the procurement subledgers for the last 5 fiscal years. That's a significant ask through merger review channels. Can you get it? A beat. Yes, give me 48 hours. You have 36, Ethan said. Because in 48 hours, Victoria Blackwell's lawyers will have noticed that your due diligence request went significantly deeper than standard scope and the window closes. A longer pause this time. You've done this before. I've been through what happens when the window closes, Ethan said. I'm not doing it again. He hung up and stood at his kitchen window in the gray early light. The street below was quiet. A delivery truck moved through the intersection. A woman walked a dog. Normal things. The kind of ordinary morning that happens right up until it doesn't. His phone buzzed. Not Sterling. A number he didn't recognize the second time in a week. But this time when he answered, there was no voice. Just a sound, brief and deliberate, and then the line went dead. It took him a moment to identify what he'd heard. Then his stomach dropped. It was Emma's voice, a fragment 3 or 4 words from a conversation captured and played back at him like a reminder. His daughter's voice through a phone he'd never called from a number that didn't exist. He stood completely still for 10 seconds. Then he called Mrs. Delgado. I need a favor, he said when she picked up her voice thick with sleep and concern. I need Emma to stay with you for a few days, maybe longer. I'll explain everything I can, but right now, I need to know she's not going to be alone. Ethan, what's happening? I'm working on something, he said. Something that some people would prefer I wasn't working on. Mrs. Delgado was quiet for a moment. She had lived in this building for 30 years. She had seen things. I'll keep her, she said. You do what you need to do. He went to Emma's room. She was still asleep, one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress hair across her face. He stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long time. He did not feel afraid exactly. He felt something sharper than fear and calmer than anger. A cold, settled certainty about exactly how far he was willing to go, and exactly what would happen to anyone who made the mistake of thinking Emma was a pressure point. She wasn't a pressure point. She was the reason there was no limit. He closed the door softly and went to get ready for his shift. The 36 hours were already counting. He worked his shift at the Meridian that evening like nothing had changed. Champagne trays, bread plates, the invisible choreography of a room that required motion without presence. Gerald Fitch sat at his usual table and did not make eye contact. The room filled and thinned and filled again. Ethan moved through it and listened, and because 14 months of invisibility will teach you things heard considerably more than anyone in that room imagined he was hearing. He heard 2 men from a firm called Eastern Corridor Partners discussing the ClearPath merger in the kind of casual, certain shorthand that meant they'd already been told it was going through. He heard a woman mention Blackwell Industries' Q1 numbers in a tone that suggested she'd seen something in them she didn't entirely understand. He heard at the edge of the East Corridor a brief exchange between 2 men he didn't recognize, suits he hadn't cataloged yet, that stopped the moment they noticed him passing with a tray. Men stop talking around waiters for 2 reasons. Either they've forgotten he's there, or they very much remember. These men remembered. He made a note of their faces in the specific way his mind retained things, not consciously, just filed, stored, available for later. He brought them their drinks when the order came through, and was exactly as invisible as they'd decided he was. Sterling called at 11 that night. The ledgers came through the formal review request. I have everything you asked for. Where do I send it? Don't send it, Ethan said. I'll come to you. They met at Sterling's office building. Not the executive floor, not the reception level, a conference room on the 7th floor that Sterling had arranged to be unlocked without going through building security's main log. A clean room was how Ethan had learned to think about it. No record of presence. The documents were stacked on the table when he walked in. Sterling was already there, jacket off, looking like a man who had been sitting with something heavy for a while. I've had my general counsel look at the top layer, Sterling said, and he used the phrase catastrophic exposure 3 times in one paragraph. Your general counsel should brace himself, Ethan said, sitting down and pulling the first stack toward him. Because this isn't the top layer. He worked through the documents with Sterling across the table, and the story they told assembled itself with the cold mechanical clarity that numbers always produced when no one had been careful enough about the silence between them. 7 construction projects across 4 years. 6 of them carried materials certifications from one of 3 testing firms. All shells, all dissolved, all traceable through registration histories to the same cluster of intermediary LLCs that orbited Blackwell Industries like moons around a planet. The steel itself had been sourced through a legitimate vendor, which was the elegant part. The vendor was real, the orders were real, but the grade specifications on the orders did not match the grade specifications on the certifications. Someone had ordered standard commercial steel for projects requiring structural grade, certified it as structural through companies they controlled, and billed Blackwell's clients for the structural grade price. Millions of dollars in the Delta, routed clean. And 7 buildings currently occupied standing on the wrong foundation. How did it stay hidden? Sterling asked. He was looking at the documents, but his voice had the quality of a man who needed to say the words out loud to believe them. Because the only entity with access to all 3 data points, the original spec, the certification, and the billing, was Blackwell Industries itself, Ethan said. Third-party auditors see the certification and accept it at face value. Clients see the billing and assume it reflects the spec. Nobody without access to the procurement subledger can cross-reference all 3 in the same view. He paused. Unless someone gives you the subledger. Which I did. Which you did. Sterling leaned back. His face had the specific look of a man who had suspected something and hoped he was wrong and found out he was right, which is one of the worst versions of being right. Victoria knows all of it. It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered it anyway. The VP who ran the operation reports to her directly. The shell companies were dissolved on a schedule that corresponds exactly to Blackwell's internal compliance review cycles. Someone with access to the compliance calendar was timing the dissolutions to stay ahead of internal audit windows. That's not a procurement officer acting alone. He looked at Sterling. She didn't just know. She architected it. The room was very quiet. Then Sterling's phone rang. He looked at it, and something changed in his face, a tightening fast and controlled. It's Edmund Blackwell, he said. Ethan looked at him. At midnight. Yes. Don't answer it. Sterling set the phone face down. It rang 9 times and went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. He knows we're in the data, Ethan said. How? Because someone at your firm who isn't as clean as you think they are told him the scope of your due diligence request. Ethan was already gathering documents, stacking them with quick efficiency. How secure is this room? I arranged it specifically to be off the... That's not what I asked. How secure? Sterling paused. Moderately. Then we need to move the physical documents tonight, and you need to make copies through a channel that isn't your firm's system. Ethan looked up. Do you have a personal lawyer, not firm-connected? Someone you trust completely on a personal basis? Yes, ma'am. Call them tonight, now. We need someone to hold a full copy of everything we have in a location with attorney-client protection, because within the next 48 hours, when Edmund Blackwell understands what we've found, the first move is going to be an injunction against your firm's review access. They'll claim proprietary information trade secrets, merger interference, any legal mechanism that gets a judge to shut down our access to these documents before we can do anything with them. He held Sterling's gaze. We have one window, maybe 30 hours. After that, the lawyers make this impossible. Sterling picked up his phone. Not to answer Edmund Blackwell, to dial a different number. He stepped to the corner of the room and spoke quietly, and Ethan listened to the shape of the conversation without hearing the specific words, and the shape was right urgent, direct, no wasted motion. The phone Edmund Blackwell had been calling went to voicemail for the third time. Ethan photographed the remaining documents on his personal phone, the photographs going into an encrypted folder he'd set up 3 days ago as soon as he understood what he was walking into. Then he stacked the originals and looked at Sterling's back as the man finished his call and turned around. "My lawyer will have someone at her office in 20 minutes, Sterling said. His voice was steady. "She's worked with federal investigators before. She knows the protocols for protecting evidentiary material." "Good." Ethan picked up his jacket. "One more thing." "What?" "After tonight, assume every communication through your firm's systems is monitored. If Edmund Blackwell has a contact inside your organization, and I believe he does anything you say through official channels, reaches him within hours." He paused. "We communicate through your personal phone from this point. No email. Nothing written through a corporate server." Sterling looked at him with an expression that was difficult to categorize, something between respect and the particular gravity of a man who has just understood fully and without cushion the weight of what he's standing in the middle of. "You've been here before," he said. "I lost last time," Ethan said, "because I trusted the systems to work. I believed that if the evidence was clear enough and the process was followed correctly, the outcome would be correct." He met Sterling's eyes. The outcome was not correct. "And now I understand that evidence is only as powerful as the mechanism you use to deliver it. This time, we build the delivery first. We don't release anything until we have a channel that can't be closed." He picked up the document stack. "Tonight, we move the originals. Tomorrow, I finish the full analysis. And in the meantime, you stay on schedule with the merger review completely normal. No flags. Nothing that looks like we've found anything worth finding." Sterling nodded slowly. "You want them to think they still have time. I want Victoria Blackwell to spend the next week believing that I am a waiter who made a mistake and that her father's phone call got your due diligence team to back down," Ethan said. "Overconfidence is the only advantage I have. I need her to keep it." He walked to the door, then stopped. "The phone call I got this morning," he said without turning around. "Someone played my daughter's voice back to me through an unknown number. A warning." Sterling said nothing. "I want you to know," Ethan said, "that it had the exact opposite of the intended effect." He opened the door and walked out into the hallway and did not look back. Downstairs on the street, he flagged a cab rather than taking the subway harder to track without a card swipe, and sat in the back with the documents against his side and the city moving past the windows, and his mind working through the sequence of the next 30 hours with the same quiet total focus that he had given to every important thing he had ever done. He thought about 7 buildings. He thought about the families inside them. He thought about a 19-year-old boy named Marcus saving money for community college, and a woman who had looked at that boy and seen something disposable, and a room full of people who had watched and done nothing. He thought about 6 years of carrying the weight of a truth that had been technically present in a room and somehow still lost. Not this time. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, different from this morning's new relay, which meant they were cycling their communication to avoid pattern detection. The text was 4 words. "Step away. Last chance." Ethan read it once. Then he turned his phone face down on the seat beside him and watched the city go past and thought about the specific shape of what he was about to do to Victoria Blackwell's empire. He did not feel afraid. He felt awake. Yet, for the first time in 6 years, he felt completely, dangerously awake. The call from Emma's school came at 10:47 on a Tuesday morning. Ethan was in the middle of cross-referencing a procurement subledger against a materials manifest for the Riverside Commons project. The 4th building on his list, a mixed-use residential tower in Brooklyn that had been fully occupied for 18 months, when his phone buzzed on the table beside him, and the screen showed a number he recognized immediately because he had memorized every number connected to his daughter the way other men memorize exit routes. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Carter." The voice was the school's administrative coordinator, a woman named Patricia, who had always been warm with him at pickup. She was not warm now. She was careful, which was worse. I need you to know that Emma is completely fine, and she's sitting with me right now. But I need to ask you something. His hand tightened on the phone. Ask. There was a man outside the school this morning during drop-off. He spoke to Emma briefly just a few words by the gate before our duty teacher intervened. Emma said he told her to tell her daddy that he needed to make a different choice. A pause. She didn't understand what he meant. But she was frightened, Mr. Carter. She held it together very well, but she was frightened. The room went completely quiet around Ethan. Not the room, him. Something inside him went quiet in the specific way that happens when a man who has been holding himself in check for days finally reaches the thing he cannot hold in check. And the response is not explosion, but the opposite. A stillness so total it is almost physical. Is she still with you right now? He said. Yes, she's right here. Can I speak to her? What? A shuffle and then Emma's voice trying to be steady, doing a decent job of it, but he could hear the effort underneath. Hi, Daddy. Hey, sweetheart. He kept his voice even, warm, completely normal. I heard you had a weird morning. There was a man, she said. He knew my name. He said your name too. I know. You did everything right. You told your teacher you stayed calm. I'm very proud of you. A small pause. Are you in trouble? I'm working on something important, he said. And some people are trying to distract me. But you're not going to be anywhere near any of that. Okay, I'm going to arrange for you to go to Uncle Paul's for a little while. Remember how much fun that was last summer? Another pause longer. Daddy? Yeah. Is this like what Mrs. Delgado told me about? When you found out something true and people got scared? He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Yes, he said. It's exactly like that. Okay, Emma said. And the steadiness in her voice was not childish bravado. It was something more honest than that, a real 8-year-old kind of courage, which is one of the more serious kinds. Then you should keep going. He did not trust himself to say anything for a moment. I love you, he said. I love you too. Don't forget I have a horse versus dogs presentation on Friday. I found 3 peer-reviewed studies. He almost laughed. I wouldn't miss it. He hung up and sat completely still for 4 seconds. Then he picked up his phone again and called Sterling. They went near my daughter, he said when Sterling picked up. A beat of silence. When? This morning, outside her school, a man spoke to her at the gate, told her to give me a message. Ethan, I'm not stopping, Ethan said. I need you to understand that clearly, and I need you to never raise it again as a reason I might stop. I'm telling you what happened, so you know how far they're willing to go. Not so you can talk me out of anything. Sterling was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The patience was still there, but something harder had moved underneath it. What do you need? 2 things. First, Emma goes to my brother Paul's house in Connecticut today. I need it arranged so that there's no digital trail connecting her location to me. No credit card, no phone call from my number, nothing that can be tracked. Can you arrange transport? Yes. Second, I need whatever security contact you trust most. Not firm connected. Personal. Someone who can put eyes on her location without creating a record. I have exactly that person, Sterling said. Former FBI. She owes me nothing, which means she can't be leveraged. I'll call her in the next 10 minutes. Good. Ethan looked at the documents spread across the table in front of him. And Sterling, after today, they know we're not going to be scared off. That means the next move isn't another warning. You understand what I'm saying? Yes, Sterling said quietly. I understand. Then we need to move faster than we planned. How long until we have the full evidentiary package ready to deliver? My lawyer says 48 hours to complete the legal framing around the documents we have. Another 24 to secure the federal contacts through channels that can't be interfered with. "We don't have 72 hours, Ethan said. "We have 48. Make it work." He hung up and looked at the Riverside Commons manifest in front of him and got back to work because fear without action is just suffering, and he had made a private decision years ago that suffering was not a thing he was willing to do alone in a room when there was something that could be done instead. He found the 5th building by noon. By 2 o'clock he had found the 6th. Found. Emma was in a car to Connecticut by 3, sitting next to a woman named Diane, who was Sterling's former FBI contact, and who had, according to Sterling, once spent 11 months undercover inside a money laundering network without breaking cover once, which was the kind of credential that made Ethan breathe a specific kind of easier. Emma had been told it was an adventure trip. She had packed her horse versus dogs research materials, which Diane had apparently received with complete professional composure. At 4:15, Ethan's personal phone showed a new text from an unknown number. Last warning was the girl. Next one isn't a warning. He screenshot it, added it to the encrypted folder, and kept working. At 6 o'clock, James called from the Meridian. "Ethan, I need to know if you're planning to be in tomorrow." "Why?" "But." A pause. The particular kind that means the person on the other end was told something they didn't want to have to pass along. "I got a call today. From someone connected to Blackwell Industries. HR, they said, though she didn't give a name. They were asking questions about your employment record here, your reliability, your conduct." Ethan was quiet. "I told them you were a model employee," James said, and his voice had something in it that surprised Ethan, a quiet steadiness, a small defiance. "I told them your conduct record was clean and your work was excellent, and I had nothing negative to report." "James, I was at the gala that night," James said. "I saw what you did for Marcus, and I've been in this business long enough to know the difference between someone causing a problem and someone doing the right thing." Another pause. "I don't know what's going on with you, Ethan, but I hope it goes the way it should." "Thank you," Ethan said, and he meant it in a way that was larger than the word. He was back at the documents within 60 seconds because gratitude, like fear, was something that mattered deeply and had to wait. The call he'd been expecting came at 8:17 that evening. Not a text this time, not an unknown number relay. A direct call from a number that resolved when he ran it through the reverse lookup service Sterling had given him access to, as registered to a communications firm that was listed as a vendor in Blackwell Industries' Q2 operating expenses. They weren't even bothering to be subtle anymore. He let it go to voicemail. 18 minutes later, he played the message. It was Victoria Blackwell's voice. Unhurried. Clear. The same precise flat register she'd used at the gala, the voice of someone who has long since made peace with the necessity of doing unpleasant things. "Mr. Carter, I think you know by now that I'm aware of what you've been doing with Alexander Sterling. I want to be direct with you because I think you're an intelligent man, and direct communication respects that. What you believe you've found does not mean what you believe it means. The documentation you've been reviewing is incomplete deliberately so, because the full context of our materials procurement is protected under proprietary operational agreements that you do not have clearance to access. Any attempt to present your partial findings as a complete picture will be dismantled by our legal team in hours, and you will have exposed yourself to significant personal liability in the process." A pause precisely timed, he noted. "You have a daughter. You have a life, however reduced, that you've worked to maintain. I am offering you one opportunity to make a different choice. Take your family and step away. The merger closes in 3 weeks. After closing, whatever grievances you believe you have can be addressed through legitimate channels where our full documentation will be available for proper review." Another pause. "Or don't. And discover what it looks like when someone with real resources decides you're a problem that needs to be solved permanently." The voicemail ended. Ethan played it a second time, listening not to the words, but to the structure underneath them. The specific way she'd said incomplete documentation rather than incorrect. The way she'd said proprietary operational agreements as a legal threat rather than a denial. The careful non-admission in every sentence. She wasn't defending innocence, she was managing exposure. He forwarded the voicemail to Sterling's personal phone, and then called Sterling's lawyer directly because the voicemail was evidence-specific datable in Victoria Blackwell's own voice, and evidence needed to be in the right hands immediately. Sterling's lawyer, a woman named Ruth Calloway, who had been in federal litigation for 30 years and who spoke in complete sentences with zero wasted words, listened to the voicemail twice on the phone. When she spoke, she said, "The phrase, problem that needs to be solved permanently, is the most useful thing she could have said. She's going to regret that one." A pause. "How close are you to having the full package ready?" 24 hours, Ethan said. "Can you do it in 18? Man, he looked at the documents. Yes. Then do it in 18, Ruth said. I have a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit who has been waiting for something solid on Blackwell Industries for 2 years. If what you've told Alexander is accurate, what you have is more than solid. But we need to move before they get an injunction filed in the morning, which is almost certainly what they're preparing tonight." Ethan was already pulling the next stack of documents toward him. Calloway. Yes. The voicemail, the texts, the incident at the school this morning, all of that goes to your federal contact as well. Witness intimidation harassment, a minor was approached. He could hear her already building it. Yes, all of it. Send me everything tonight. He worked through the night. Not frantically precisely. That was the thing people misunderstood about the kind of work his mind did. It wasn't fast in the way a sprint is fast. It was fast in the way a river is fast. Continuous and directed and impossible to stop once it had found its channel. He built the evidentiary package the way he'd been taught. The way he'd done it once before and watched get dismantled, but this time he built it differently. He built it the way you build something after you've watched your version fail, which means you know exactly where the weakness was, and you make that point the strongest part of the structure. Bio, he documented not just the fraud itself, but the concealment mechanism. Not just the falsified certifications, but the timeline of the shell company dissolutions mapped against the internal compliance cycles, which proved that someone with access to the compliance calendar had been managing the cover-up actively and continuously for 4 years. Not just the financial discrepancy, but the physical chain, the original spec orders, the grade differential, the billing records, the occupied buildings the families currently living inside them. He built a document that could not be called incomplete. That left no room for partial context. That answered every version of the counter-argument Victoria's lawyers would construct before they had time to construct it. At 2 a.m., he found the 7th building. He sat back from the table. Again, 7 projects. 7 buildings. Thousands of families. 4 years of active, deliberate, organized concealment. Millions of dollars in fraudulent billing. And underneath all of it, the specific shape of what Victoria Blackwell actually was, not a ruthless businesswoman who played hard and close to the line, but something simpler and more terrible, a person who had decided that other people's safety was a variable she could manage in pursuit of profit, and had built an entire operational system around that decision. He thought about Marcus, 19 years old, napkin in hand. A room full of people who watched and shuffled their feet and looked elsewhere. He thought about the word that had been used about him for 6 years by people who thought it settled something. Poor, single, dad. He picked up his pen and kept working. At 4:30 a.m. His phone buzzed. Not a call, not a text. An alert from the building's front door camera, which he'd connected to a motion detection app 2 days ago without telling anyone. Someone was in the vestibule. Not the front entrance. The service entrance on the side alley. What? He moved fast and quiet, the way a man moves when there is no time to think about moving. He took the documents off the table, the physical copies, and the legal pad, and put them inside the fireproof lockbox he'd bought 3 days ago and stored in the back of his closet behind Emma's winter coats. He pocketed his phone. He left the table clear. Then he sat down in the kitchen and waited. Nothing happened. 4 minutes passed. The motion alert didn't trigger again. He checked the camera feed. The service entrance was empty. Either someone had been there and left, or the camera had caught something ambient. He stayed at the table for another 10 minutes, completely still, breathing slowly. Then he opened his laptop and kept working. Because that was the choice. Every time that was the choice. Not the heroic version, not the version where the right decision announces itself with a clear conscience and a swelling score underneath. Just the quiet, continuous, exhausting choice to keep going when stopping would be so much easier. He sent the completed evidentiary package to Ruth Calloway at 6:18 a.m. Her reply came back in 11 minutes. "This is complete. This is actionable. I'm calling my federal contact at 8. Be available." He made coffee and watched the gray light come up through the kitchen window. Sterling called at 7:45. "Our due diligence access was suspended this morning. Blackwell's lawyers filed an emergency motion at 6 a.m. Proprietary Information Protection Merger Interference, exactly what you predicted." A pause. "But Ethan, we already have everything." "I know." "How did you know they'd move at 6? "Because that's when the courts open for emergency filings," Ethan said. "And because Victoria Blackwell is methodical. She does the clean version of every move before she considers anything messier. The legal motion is the clean version. And the messier version." Ethan looked at the lockbox in his closet, at the cleared kitchen table, at the motion alert on his phone that had gone off at 4:30 in the morning. "Already tried," he said. "Sure." Calloway called at 8:22. "I've spoken to my contact. Her name is Special Agent Diana Reyes. She's with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, and she has been building a peripheral case on Blackwell Industries for 26 months. Corporate informants, financial anomalies, nothing solid enough to move on. What you've given me is the solid piece she's been missing." A pause, and for the first time, Ruth Calloway's voice carried something beyond its professional flatness. Something that was, if he was reading it correctly, close to satisfaction. "She wants to meet you. Today. Where and when?" 11 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Ethan, bring everything you have on the school incident, and the voicemail specifically. Reyes is building a parallel track for witness intimidation, and a sitting billionaire leaving a threatening voicemail for a witness is the kind of thing that makes federal prosecutors very, very happy. He met Agent Reyes at a federal building conference room at 11 o'clock exactly. She was 40-something, compact, with the kind of attention in her eyes that made you understand immediately that she had spent a very long time watching people try to hide things. She shook his hand, sat down across from him, and opened a folder. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I've reviewed what Calloway sent me this morning. Walk me through how you found the shell company dissolution pattern." He walked her through it. All of it. The procurement subledger, the certification timelines, the grade differentials, the shell company registration histories, the compliance calendar correlation. He spoke clearly and without editorializing, the way he'd been trained, the way he'd done once before in a federal conference room, and watched it not be enough. Reyes listened without interrupting. When he finished, she closed her folder. "The compliance calendar correlation is the key piece," she said. "We had the financial discrepancy on 2 of these projects from a corporate informant 14 months ago. We couldn't close the loop on who had access to the concealment mechanism. The calendar correlation closes the loop." "It points to Victoria directly," Ethan said. "It points to whoever had access to the internal compliance schedule," Reyes said carefully. "Which, when we cross-reference against Blackwell's organizational chart and internal access logs, which we have had for 8 months through a separate investigative thread, yes. It points to Victoria Blackwell and to her father." She looked at him steadily. "How solid are you on the grade differential? Can that be challenged?" The original purchase orders have the commercial grade specification in Blackwell's own procurement system. The certifications have structural grade. The billing has structural grade pricing. You have 3 documents from 3 independent sources: the vendor, the certification firm, and the billing department, and they tell 3 different stories about the same steel. The only way to challenge it is to challenge all 3 sources simultaneously, and 2 of those sources are companies Blackwell doesn't control. He met her eyes. It won't hold up to challenge. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. You've testified in a federal proceeding before. Yes. It didn't go well. The evidence was buried before the proceeding reached the stage where testimony mattered, he said. The evidence was there. The channel was compromised. The channel isn't compromised this time, Reyes said. I want you to understand what that means in practical terms. This moves fast. Blackwell's lawyers filed an injunction this morning, which means they know something's coming. We won't have the luxury of a slow build. She looked at the documents. I can have an emergency grand jury review initiated within 48 hours. But I need to know, is there anything else? Anything you haven't found yet? Anything that might surface after we move and give them room to reframe? Ethan thought about the 7 buildings, the 4 years, the specific deliberate architecture of the concealment. There's an 8th project, he said. I haven't found it yet, but the pattern says there is one. The shell company registrations cover an 8-cycle period, and I've only matched 7 to specific projects. Find it, Reyes said. Before we move, I want the full picture. He nodded. Mr. Carter. She said it as he was standing to leave. The voicemail she left you, the school incident. I want you to know that those are not being treated as side matters. That is a sitting executive intimidating a federal witness and approaching a minor. Those are separate charges, and they are serious ones. He looked at her. I know, he said, but that's not why I'm here. I know it's not, Reyes said. That's why I trust what you've brought me. He walked out of the federal building into the October morning. The city moved around him, indifferent and continuous the way cities always are. Traffic voices, the particular texture of a Tuesday in New York where 10,000 things are happening simultaneously, and none of them know about each other. He pulled out his phone and called Sterling. I need access to the 8th project, he said. The shell company registration cycle has one more loop. Something between mid-2020 and early 2021. Do you have any Blackwell project documentation from that period that didn't come through the merger review? A pause. My firm did an unrelated infrastructure assessment in 2021 that included a Blackwell-adjacent property in the Bronx. We flagged a materials concern at the time, but it was outside our scope, and we didn't pursue it. The air changed. What kind of materials concern? Ethan said. Structural, Sterling said. And his voice, for the first time since Ethan had known him, was not steady. Ethan, there's a school in that building. Ethan stopped walking. People moved past him on the sidewalk around him, a river parting for a stone, and he stood completely still in the middle of it, and felt the full weight of what he was holding land on him at once, all 7 buildings. And now an 8th. And in the 8th one, a school and children inside it. Every single day, standing on a floor, built on a lie that a woman in a dark dress had decided was acceptable because the money was right. He thought about Emma's voice on the phone that morning. Then you should keep going. He thought about the choice, the continuous, quiet, exhausting, non-heroic choice. Send me everything you have on the Bronx property, he said, right now. Already sending. He put the phone in his pocket and kept walking faster now back toward the work, back toward the thing that had to be finished because it simply could not be left unfinished. Not now, not with a school on the list, and a woman who thought a voicemail at 8 in the evening was a sufficient ending for a man like him. She had made a mistake the night of the gala. She had looked at him and seen a waiter. She had seen a function. A tray that moved. She had not seen what was actually standing in front of her. A man who had already lost everything, once rebuilt from nothing, and discovered in the process that there is a specific kind of freedom that belongs only to people who have nothing left to be threatened with, except the truth. And Ethan Carter had the truth. All of it now. All 8 buildings. He had 36 hours. He was going to use every single one. The documents on this Bronx property arrived on Ethan's phone at 11:43 a.m., and by noon, he understood exactly what Sterling's firm had flagged in 2021, and why someone had made sure it went no further. The building was called Meridian Heights. The city kept recycling. That word, Meridian, as if money had only so many names for itself. A 7-story mixed-use structure in the South Bronx, completed in late 2019. Ground floor commercial, upper floors, residential, and tucked into the second floor occupying roughly a third of the building's eastern footprint, a charter school called Bright Futures Academy. 231 students. Kindergarten through 6th grade. Sterling's 2021 assessment had been commissioned by a neighboring property developer with no connection to Blackwell, which was the only reason it existed at all. An outside eye accidentally adjacent that had noticed a material's inconsistency and noted it in a report that was technically filed, technically available, and practically invisible, because nobody with the context to understand what it meant had ever seen it, and nobody with the motive to act on it had ever been told it existed. Until now. Ethan called Reyes at 12:08. "I found the 8th project," he said. "It's a building in the South Bronx. There's a charter school inside it. 231 kids." The silence on Reyes's end lasted exactly 4 seconds. He counted them. "Send me everything," she said. Her voice had changed, not louder, not faster, but denser somehow, like pressure building behind glass. "Right now. And Ethan, don't call anyone else until you hear back from me. Not Sterling, not Calloway, nobody. Give me 30 minutes. He sent the files and sat with his phone in his hand and waited. He did not think about the children in that school in the way that would have made waiting impossible. He thought about them the way he thought about all of it as a fact that required a correct response. And the correct response was not panic, it was precision, and precision required stillness. He had learned that the hard way. Panic is what had made him move too fast. 6 years ago, speak before the documentation was complete, trust the process, before he'd verified the process could be trusted. Stillness was not indifference. Stillness was the discipline that kept the work clean. His phone rang at 12:31. Not Reyes. Sterling. "My general counsel just received a call from Blackwell's legal team," Sterling said, and his voice was tight in a way Ethan hadn't heard before. "They've filed the injunction. Federal court emergency basis this morning's filing is now through. We have a temporary restraining order blocking access to any Blackwell documentation obtained through the merger review process. Does that include what we already copied and transferred to Calloway?" Their position is yes. Calloway's position is no. That argument is going to a judge this afternoon. A pause. "Ethan, if the judge rules in their favor." "The FBI already has the documents," Ethan said. "The injunction covers our access. It doesn't retroactively seal materials that are already in a federal investigator's possession through a separate channel. Reyes has everything. The injunction is noise." A beat. "You're sure?" "I'm sure that's how it works legally. I'm sure Blackwell's lawyers know that too. This isn't about actually stopping the investigation. It's about creating a public record that we overreached. They're building the narrative that everything we found was obtained improperly, so that when the story breaks, the first 24 hours of coverage is about our conduct rather than theirs." He stood up and moved to the window. "It's the same play they ran 6 years ago. Create enough noise around the messenger that the message takes time to land." So what do? We let Calloway handle the injunction, and we wait for Reyes. Reyes called back at 12:44. "The school is being assessed." She said no preamble. I have a structural engineering team from the city's buildings department making contact with the school administration right now. They'll do a preliminary assessment this afternoon. If there's immediate danger, we evacuate. If there's not, and based on the documentation, the risk is real but not acute. This is long-term structural degradation, not imminent collapse. Then we proceed on the investigative timeline. A pause. I need you to listen to me carefully about what comes next. I'm listening. Edmund Blackwell is hosting the city's annual Infrastructure and Investment Gala tonight at the Grand Meridian. Every major real estate developer, every relevant city official, every financial institution with Blackwell exposure, they will all be in one room. My team has been building toward a moment to move on Blackwell Industries for 26 months. Tonight is that moment. We move tonight in that room so that there is no opportunity for capital flight document destruction or witness coordination before the arrests. She paused again. I need you there. Ethan said nothing for a moment. You're the witness who can authenticate the documentation in real time. Reyes continued. If Edmund Blackwell attempts to deny the certification chain or the shell company structure in front of that room, you are the person who can stand there and dismantle the denial with the specific technical knowledge that no one else in that building is going to have. My agents will be positioned throughout the venue. The moment I have confirmation that the grand jury has returned an indictment, which my prosecutor tells me will happen by 6 this evening, we move. But I want you inside. You want me to walk back into the Grand Meridian, Ethan said. Yes. The building where I work, where Victoria Blackwell has already made clear she considers me a problem. Yes. He thought about the moment at the gala where he'd set down his tray and walked 20 feet and changed the trajectory of everything that followed. He thought about the way the room had laughed, the way that laugh had felt not wounding exactly, but clarifying, the laugh of people who had already decided what he was and felt comfortable saying so. What time? He said. What time? Doors open at 7. I need you inside by 7:30. Do not speak to anyone from Blackwell's orbit before I give you a signal. The signal is my agent Rachel asking you if you need anything from the bar. When that happens, you move to the northeast corridor near the private dining entrance and wait. I know where that is, Ethan said. I've worked it for 14 months. A brief pause. Right, Reyes said. And for just a moment beneath the federal agent's professional flat effect, he heard something that might have been the particular kind of respect that one precise person has for another. Right, of course you do. He called Sterling after he hung up. I need a jacket, he said. A silence. Sorry. I've been wearing a uniform in that building for 14 months. Tonight I'm not. I need a jacket that fits and isn't the thing I wear when I'm carrying other people's glasses. Can you arrange it in 6 hours? Another silence, and then unmistakably, Sterling laughed. It was brief, quiet, and genuine. Yes, he said. I can arrange that. Then Ethan called Paul's house in Connecticut, because there was something that needed to happen before the evening did. Emma picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting. Hi, Daddy. Hey, sweetheart. How's the research going? I found a 4th study, she said immediately. It's actually more complicated than I thought. Dogs have higher social intelligence, but horses have better long-term memory. I might need to restructure my whole argument. That sounds like good science, he said. It's annoying science, she said. But yeah. A pause. Are you calling because of tonight? He hadn't told her about tonight. He hadn't told her anything specific. What makes you think something's happening tonight? Because you only call in the middle of the afternoon when something important is happening, she said. You're very predictable, Daddy, for a smart person. He sat down. Tonight I'm going to finish what I started, he said. And I wanted to hear your voice before I did. Emma was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the 8-year-old lightness was still there, but underneath it was something older and steadier. Are the bad people going to be there? Yes. Are you scared? He thought about that honestly. No, he said. I think I would be if I wasn't sure I was right. But I'm sure. Okay, she said. And then Daddy, the dragon thing. Yeah. In the book we're reading, The Grandmother the Codebreaker, she said the hardest part wasn't being brave. She said the hardest part was being brave when nobody was watching, and it didn't feel like anything. He closed his eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. That's exactly right. You've been doing that part for a long time, Emma said. Tonight is just the other part. He did not trust his voice for a moment. Go work on your research, he said finally. Already am, she said. Be careful. Love you. Love you too. He hung up and sat with the phone in his hand, and the city noise outside the window, and the specific kind of stillness that comes when a man has heard exactly what he needed to hear from exactly the right person. Then he stood up and got ready for the evening. Sterling's assistant delivered the jacket at 4 o'clock, dark navy. Well cut, the kind of thing that made a man look like he belonged in a room rather than serving it. Ethan put it on in front of the small mirror in his hallway and looked at himself for a moment. He looked like a different version of the person he'd been for 14 months. He looked, he realized, like the version of himself that he'd put in storage 6 years ago and quietly maintained. The way you maintain a room you're not living in but haven't given up on. He was ready at 6. Reyes's confirmation text came at 6:47. Grand jury returned, indictment sealed. We move at 9. Be inside by 7:30. He read it twice, then he put the phone in his pocket and left the apartment. He took a cab. He arrived at the Grand Meridian at 7:22. The doorman at the main entrance, not the service entrance, the main entrance, the one he had never used in 14 months, looked at him with the brief assessing glance that doormen at these places develop into an art form. Ethan held his gaze and said Sterling's name, and the doorman nodded and opened the door, and Ethan Carter walked into the Grand Meridian through the front entrance for the first time. The room was full. Every face he had served for 14 months was here, plus more the full architecture of New York's financial and political weight, dressed and assembled and moving through the particular choreography of a room where everyone is performing for everyone else and calling it networking. He recognized faces from newspapers, from public records, from the organizational charts he'd been studying for 3 weeks. He recognized Edmund Blackwell near the center of the room, silver-haired and broad, and holding court the way men do when they believe the ground beneath them is solid. He recognized Victoria Blackwell at the far end of the room. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. The distance between them was maybe 40 feet. Across 40 feet of marble floor and 500 people, and the ambient noise of a room that didn't know yet what was about to happen, their eyes met. Her expression changed. Not dramatically, a very slight tightening, a very small recalibration. The look of someone who has received unexpected information and is processing it in real time. She had known he worked here. She had not expected him to walk through the front door in a navy jacket and look back at her without looking away. He held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked away and moved into the room. He found a position near the east wall where he could see both exits and the main floor, and he waited. He was very good at waiting. 14 months of invisibility had made him extraordinarily patient. He collected a glass of water from a passing tray and stood with it and let the room move around him and watched. At 7:58, he felt someone stop beside him. Not Reyes's agent. James. His floor manager, James, holding a clipboard and looking at Ethan with an expression somewhere between confusion and something he couldn't quite articulate. "You're on the wrong side of this room," James said. "I know," Ethan said. James looked at the jacket. At Ethan's posture, different tonight, not the careful smallness of 14 months. Something else, something that had been there all along underneath it. "Is this about the Blackwell situation?" he said quietly. "Yes." James stood with that for a moment. Is it going to be bad for them? Yes. James nodded slowly. Good, he said, and walked away. At 8:31, Victoria Blackwell materialized at Ethan's elbow. Mao. She moved through the room the way she always moved, as if it rearranged itself to accommodate her, which in practice it more or less did. She came to stand beside him, and for a moment said nothing, the two of them looking out at the same room from the same angle, which was almost absurd given everything. You have nerve, she said finally, quiet, conversational, nothing in her voice that anyone nearby would read as anything other than small talk. I'll give you that. I've been told, Ethan said. You understand that nothing you've put together is going to hold, she said. Our legal team has been 3 steps ahead of this since the moment you sat down with Alexander Sterling. The injunction this afternoon was the opening move. There are 4 more in sequence. By the time anything you've gathered reaches a courtroom, the procedural landscape will have made it inadmissible, challenged, or irrelevant. That's an interesting theory, Ethan said. It's not a theory, it's a strategy that has worked before. It worked once, Ethan said, under different conditions, with a different level of documentation and a different federal contact and a different judge. He turned to look at her directly. And without a voicemail, in your own voice, threatening a federal witness. Something moved behind her eyes. Fast. Controlled immediately. You left that message on a phone registered to a Blackwell vendor, he said, keeping his voice exactly as quiet and conversational as hers. Which means it's a documented communication from a Blackwell corporate asset to a person who had by that point already been in contact with federal investigators. Your lawyers are going to have a genuinely difficult time explaining that one in terms of anything other than witness intimidation. Her jaw tightened. It was the first physical tell he had ever seen from her in all the weeks of this, and it was very small and very controlled, but it was there. That message was entirely within. And the man at my daughter's school, Ethan said. That was a different problem, because a minor was approached. And that is a charge that does not negotiate well. The silence between them was dense with everything that wasn't being said. You don't know who you're dealing with, Victoria said. And for the first time underneath the flatness, he heard something else. Not fear, she was too disciplined for fear to show. But the specific tone of a person who is recalculating the weight of something they had previously underestimated. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Ethan said. I've been looking at your numbers for 3 weeks. Numbers are more honest than people. They tell you everything if you know how to listen. He turned back to the room. I know about 8 buildings. I know about consolidated materials verification. I know about Paul Greer's severance. I know about the compliance calendar. And I know about the school in the Bronx with 231 children in it. He paused. I know everything, Ms. Blackwell. And so does the FBI. She went completely still. It lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. And in those seconds, Ethan saw something cross her face that he hadn't expected. Not the anger he'd prepared for, not the calculation he'd anticipated, but something rawer than either. Something that looked almost briefly like the recognition of a thing that cannot be undone. Then it was gone, the mask back in place, perfect and immediate. Excuse me, she said quietly and moved back into the room. He watched her go. At 8:49 she reached her father. He couldn't hear the conversation from where he stood, but he watched the body language, and it told him enough. Edmund Blackwell's face went through 3 distinct expressions in 40 seconds. Dismissal attention, and then something that settled into a stillness. Ethan recognized because he'd felt it himself. The stillness of a man who has just understood that the ground he was standing on was not what he believed it to be. Edmund said something. Victoria answered. Edmund turned and scanned the room with a different quality of attention than he'd had 60 seconds earlier. Not the relaxed survey of a man at his own event, but something searching and rapid. His eyes found Ethan. And Ethan, a man who had been invisible in this room for 14 months. A man who had been called just a poor single dad in this very building, a man who had carried trays and absorbed dismissals and kept working through the night for 3 weeks, looked back at Edmund Blackwell and did not look away. At 9:03, the doors opened. Not dramatically, not all at once. 4 agents in evening wear at the main entrance, 2 more at each side exit. Agent Rachel Diaz-Reyes's operative appeared at Ethan's left and said quietly, "Bar run, or do you want to move to the northeast corridor?" "Northeast corridor," Ethan said. He moved through the room. People stepped aside without knowing why, the way crowds part for a person moving with a specific and unconflicted direction. He reached the northeast corridor, the private dining entrance, the exact spot where he had stepped between Victoria Blackwell and a 19-year-old boy named Marcus, and stood there. Reyes came through the main entrance at 9:06 with her badge visible. The room didn't process it immediately. That was the thing about moments like this, they took a beat to land. The music kept playing for approximately 4 seconds after Reyes entered, and then the nearest cluster of guests noticed the badge and the agents fanning out behind her, and the music died in the particular mid-note way that things die when the room has finally understood what is happening. 500 people went quiet. Edmund Blackwell was still standing where he'd been when his daughter had told him. He hadn't run. Ethan noted that. Whatever else Edmund was, he was not a man who ran. He was a man who had lived long enough inside his own power to believe even now that it would somehow absorb this. "Bumbo." Reyes walked to him directly. She said something quietly. Ethan couldn't hear it from the corridor, but he knew the words by their structure, the rights, the charges, the names. She said them without theatrics, because she was not a theatrical person, and this was not theater. This was the clean, specific work of a 26-month investigation arriving at its correct conclusion. Edmund listened. His face was still. His hands were at his sides. Victoria was across the room. 2 agents had positioned themselves nearby with the practiced casualness of people who have done this before. When she saw them move toward her, she looked across the room and she found Ethan. In the corridor, standing where he'd stood that first night. Looking back at her with the same steady, unhurried attention he'd given her at the gala 3 weeks ago, over a boy with a napkin and a ruined hem. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away and let the agents reach her and did not resist. The room erupted not in chaos, but in the specific escalating wave of noise that 500 people make when they understand simultaneously that something enormous has just happened, and they were all inside it when it did. Phones came out. Voices rose. 2 men from the Bridgemont Capitol table. Gerald Fitch's orbit. The men who had laughed at the waiter who dared stood with their drinks half raised and their faces doing the complicated calculus of exposure. What had they known? What could be connected to them? How far did the ground beneath them actually extend? Ethan watched it all from the corridor and felt nothing that resembled triumph. What he felt was something quieter and more complete. The specific resolution of a thing that has been held in tension for a very long time. Not release exactly more, like the moment when a note you've been sustaining finally resolves to the chord it was always moving toward. Correct. Finished. True. Calloway appeared at his shoulder at 9:14. He hadn't seen her come in. The injunction was denied 30 minutes ago, she said without preamble, because she was Ruth Calloway, and preamble was not a thing she engaged in. The judge ruled that materials already in federal investigative possession through an independent channel are outside the scope of a merger review injunction. Everything holds. She paused. Ethan, everything holds. He nodded. The structural engineering assessment on the Bronx building came back an hour ago, she continued. No acute risk. Long-term remediation required, which Blackwell Industries will be funding through asset seizure. She said it cleanly without editorializing. The school stays open. The kids are fine. He let out a breath he hadn't entirely realized he'd been holding. You built this correctly, Calloway said. And from Ruth Calloway, he understood that was a significant thing to say. The documentation is complete. The chain of custody is clean. The concealment mechanism is irrefutable. There is no noise to make around this. A pause. They can't muddy it. That word again, the one he'd carried for 6 years. He looked at her. I know, he said. At 9:31, Sterling appeared beside him. He'd been in the room. Ethan hadn't spotted him, which meant Sterling had positioned himself carefully, which was consistent with everything Ethan knew about the man. He came to stand beside Ethan in the corridor, and they watched together as Edmund Blackwell was guided toward the main entrance, and the room that had celebrated him for 40 years made way for the agents on either side of him, and the exit that had always been his made him look, for the first time, like a man who was leaving a room rather than commanding one. 26 months, Sterling said quietly. Reyes has been building this for 26 months. She had the right pieces, Ethan said. She just needed the one that connected them. Sterling was quiet for a moment. You know what the piece was. The compliance calendar correlation. No. Sterling turned to look at him. You were the piece. Someone who had been through the machine and survived it and understood exactly where the gaps were. He paused. I knew it when I saw you walk across that room toward that boy. I knew what kind of man does that in front of 500 people who are all choosing not to. Ethan looked at the room. At the guests, the agents, the overturned order of an evening that had started as a celebration of exactly the kind of power that was now being walked out the door in handcuffs. I want to offer you a position, Sterling said. Formally, with full compensation, director-level forensic analysis for Sterling Capital. Real work. Work that matters. I've already spoken to 3 other firms who would be in competition for you once this story breaks publicly tomorrow, and I'd prefer to make the offer tonight. Ethan said nothing for a moment. You don't have to decide tonight, Sterling added. I know, Ethan said. I'll think about it. And he meant that honestly, not as deflection, but as the genuine answer of a man who has learned to give problems the specific attention they require, rather than the attention the moment pressures him toward. Tonight was one thing. Tomorrow was another. He would think about it with the same careful, complete focus he gave everything else that mattered. Yes. He stayed until the agents had finished their initial work, and the room had fragmented into the dozens of individual conversations that follow a seismic event, each person processing it through the lens of their own exposure and calculation and disbelief. He stayed until he had given his preliminary statement to Reyes and confirmed the follow-up interview schedule for the coming week. He stayed until James found him one more time near the service corridor and said simply, I'm glad it was you, and offered his hand, and Ethan shook it. Then he walked out of the Grand Meridian through the main entrance into the October night and stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed the cold air and listened to the city doing what the city always does, continuing indifferent, enormous, full of lives that don't know each other, and buildings that stand on foundations that most people will never have reason to question. He thought about 8 buildings. He thought about 231 children. He thought about a 19-year-old boy with a napkin in his hand, looking for words that would make it stop. He thought about a room that had laughed. His phone showed one unread text from Emma sent at 9:15. Mrs. Diane let me stay up and watch the news. I saw them. You did it, Daddy. I knew you would. Also, I finished my presentation, and I think I've convinced myself that both animals are smart in different ways. Good night. Love you. He read it twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and stood on the sidewalk outside the Grand Meridian, and felt for the first time in a very long time the specific, undefended, uncomplicated weight of a thing done right. He slept for 6 hours. Not because the night was over. It wasn't. Not by any practical measure. There were federal interviews, scheduled depositions to prepare for a media landscape that was going to explode the moment the story cleared embargo, and a professional life that had just been handed back to him in a form he hadn't fully examined yet. None of that was finished. All of it was waiting. But his body had made a unilateral decision, and for once in a very long time, Ethan Carter did not argue with it. He lay down at 11:30 p.m. with his phone face down on the nightstand and was asleep before midnight, and did not dream about anything he could remember when he woke at 5:47 a.m. to the sound of his own alarm and the specific quality of early morning light that belongs to days when something has fundamentally changed and the world hasn't caught up to it yet. Whoosh. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street below and watched a delivery truck and a man walking a dog and a woman in scrubs moving fast toward the subway entrance, and the city was exactly what it always was. Continuous, indifferent, enormous. And he was standing in it differently than he had been 24 hours ago. His phone had 47 notifications. He looked at them the way he looked at a complicated ledger methodically, without rushing starting at the beginning. 11 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, which meant journalists. 6 texts from Sterling in sequence, each one more urgent than the last. The final one sent at 2 a.m., reading simply, "Call me when you're up. It's moving faster than anticipated." 3 texts from Ruth Calloway, professional and precise with times and locations for the coming week's interviews. A voicemail from a 202 area code Washington that he filed for later. And 1 text from Carol, his ex-wife, Emma's mother. Portland Carol, who had not initiated contact with him about anything other than Emma's schedule in 4 years. The text said, "I saw the news this morning. I don't have the right words. But I want you to know I understand now what it cost you back then, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to hold it with you. You did something extraordinary. Emma is so proud of you. So am I." He read it twice. He set the phone down. He picked up his coffee and stood with it, and let that land in whatever place. Things like that land, which is not a place you can locate precisely, but you know when something has reached it. Then he called Sterling. Sterling picked up on the first ring, which meant he hadn't slept at all, or had been awake for hours, and knowing Sterling, it was the latter. "The story broke at midnight," he said without preamble. "Wall Street Journal ran it first. Calloway's contact there had the embargo set for midnight, and honored it exactly. By 2 a.m., it was on every major financial wire. By 4, it was network news." A pause. "Ethan?" Blackwell Industries stock lost 63% of its value in after-hours trading. The board called an emergency session at 3 a.m. They're already moving to distance themselves from Edmund and Victoria personally and preserve what they can of the company's assets. "Schmidt. They'll fail," Ethan said. "Reyes's team has already filed asset freezes on the primary holding entities. The board has nothing to distance themselves to." Sterling paused again. "There's something else. The 3 other firms I mentioned last night, the ones who would compete for you once this went public, I've heard from 2 of them already this morning. One of them is offering a number that I'm going to have to work hard to beat." He said it without resentment, which Ethan appreciated. "I meant what I said last night. I'd like you at Sterling Capital, but I want you to have the full picture before you make any decisions." "I told you I'd think about it," Ethan said. "I know. I just want to make sure you're thinking about it with accurate information." "I always do," Ethan said. And Sterling laughed, brief and genuine, the same laugh from last night, and hung up. At 7 a.m., Ethan drove to Connecticut. He hadn't told Emma he was coming. He'd told Paul he was on his way and asked Paul to keep it quiet, and Paul, his younger brother, quieter than Ethan, steadier in the way that younger siblings of complicated men sometimes are, had said simply, "She's been up since 5:30 watching the news on my tablet. I think she figured it out." He rang the bell at Paul's house at 8:22. Emma opened the door.
"Stemmy."
She was still in her pajamas, the ones with the small blue stars that she'd had since last winter and that were getting slightly short in the legs. Her hair was a complete disaster. She had apparently been crying fairly recently because her eyes had the specific look that crying leaves on children, and she had apparently decided she was done crying and was now somewhere past it in the territory of a person who has felt something very large and come out on the other side of it. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, then she ran. She hit him at full speed, the way only an 8-year-old can, entirely without any of the self-consciousness that adults bring to physical expression, all of her weight and momentum committed completely to the act of reaching him. He caught her and held on, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist and pressed her face into his shoulder and held on, and he held her back with both arms and stood on his brother's front step and let himself feel the full, uncomplicated weight of his daughter in his arms. He didn't say anything for a moment. Neither did she. Then against his shoulder, muffled and slightly unsteady, "Did you beat the dragon?" "Shut." He closed his eyes. He thought about 7 buildings and 1 school. He thought about a compliance calendar and a 19-year-old boy with a napkin. He thought about a room that had laughed and a woman who had looked at a man carrying a tray and decided he was a function rather than a person. And what happened when you made that mistake about exactly the wrong man? He thought about 6 years of carrying something heavy alone. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "The dragon will never hurt anyone again." She pulled back just far enough to look at his face, checking it the way children check adult faces for the truth that the words might be protecting them from. She looked at him for a long moment with those red-edged eyes. Then she appeared satisfied with what she found. "Okay," she said. "Good." She dropped back to her feet. "Uncle Paul made pancakes. There are blueberry ones. Come inside." He followed her in. Paul was in the kitchen, and he looked at Ethan, the way brothers look at each other after something large, a look that contained too much to be stated, and didn't try to state. It just held it briefly, and then moved on to the practical business of pancakes and coffee, and the ordinary morning that follows, an extraordinary night. "You look like you slept," Paul said. 6 hours. 6. That's more than I did. Paul poured coffee without being asked. "It's everywhere, Ethan. Every channel, every feed. They're calling it the biggest infrastructure fraud prosecution in a decade." "I know." "Are you going to be okay with all of it? The press, the attention?" "One thing at a time," Ethan said. Emma was already at the table with a plate of pancakes and her research materials, the horse versus dogs presentation, which she had apparently brought to Connecticut in her overnight bag, as though it were essential equipment. She was making small adjustments to a hand-drawn graph while eating in the particular multitasking way of a person who sees no contradiction between serious intellectual work and blueberry pancakes. Ethan sat across from her and drank his coffee and watched her work and felt something that was too quiet and too large to have a precise name. Not happiness exactly, not relief exactly. Something that contained both and was also beyond both. The specific feeling of a man who has kept a promise he made to himself in the worst moment of his life and is now sitting across from the reason he made it. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A 202 number, the Washington voicemail from earlier, calling again. He stepped away from the table and answered, "Mate." The voice on the other end introduced itself as belonging to a deputy director at the Department of Justice, which Ethan processed with the same methodical calm he processed everything. The deputy director said that the Blackwell case had attracted attention at a federal level beyond the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, attention relating to the broader question of infrastructure, certification integrity across multiple states, not just New York, and that there was a conversation the department would like to have with Ethan at his earliest convenience regarding a possible consultative role in a wider federal review. Ethan listened to all of it. Then he said, "I'll call you back this week," and hung up. He stood in Paul's hallway for a moment. Then he went back to the kitchen table and his coffee and his daughter's blueberry pancakes, because the Department of Justice could wait 20 minutes, and the pancakes could not. The federal interview with Reyes happened 2 days later in a conference room that looked like every federal conference room functional fluorescent, designed for the transaction of serious business, without the distraction of aesthetics. Reyes had 2 colleagues with her, both of whom Ethan had not met. A prosecutor named David Kwan, who had apparently been attached to the Blackwell case for 8 months, and who asked questions the way a surgeon operates, precisely without wasted motion, cutting exactly to what he needed. and a forensic accountant from the FBI's own financial crimes unit named Sandra Okafor, who within 15 minutes of the interview beginning had asked 3 questions that told Ethan she was excellent at her job. He answered everything fully. He walked them through the complete documentation sequence, the procurement subledger, the certification chain, the shell company timeline, the compliance calendar correlation, the grade differential across all 8 projects. He answered Kwan's legal framing questions with the same precision he'd given Reyes. He answered Okafor's technical questions with the kind of specific detail that comes from 3 weeks of living inside a set of numbers until you know them the way you know your own handwriting. At one point, Kwan looked up from his notes and said, "Mr. Carter, the compliance calendar correlation, the mechanism that proves active concealment rather than passive negligence. How did you find it?" Matt. Ethan thought about how to answer that accurately. "I've seen this structure before," he said. 6 years ago. A different company, a different fraud, a different level of sophistication, but the same fundamental architecture. Someone managing a concealment actively in real time, staying ahead of audit windows by monitoring internal review schedules. He paused. 6 years ago I found it, and I wasn't believed. This time, I built the documentation around it first, before saying anything to anyone. I made sure the proof was complete before the claim was made. May. Kwan looked at him. "You built it so it couldn't be muddied." "Yes." A pause. "The case 6 years ago. Meridian Advisory. Our office reviewed it at the time. The original allegation had merit." "I know it did," Ethan said. "I made it." Kwan held his gaze. "The outcome of that case was not correct," he said. "And it was not an apology. It was too precise and too late to be an apology. And Kwan was not a man who offered things imprecisely. But it was an acknowledgement, and from a federal prosecutor in this room, in this context, it was a significant one. This outcome will be." Ethan nodded once. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." The interviews continued through the week. 3 more sessions with Reyes's team. A separate session with the city's buildings department regarding the structural remediation timeline for all 8 projects. A conference call with the Attorney General's office that lasted 90 minutes and covered territory. Ethan hadn't anticipated the question of whether the evidentiary framework he'd constructed could be adapted as a model for detection methodology in future infrastructure audits, which was a conversation that started as a question and ended as something that felt like the beginning of a proposal. On Thursday, 4 days after the gala, the first of the offers arrived in formal written form. Not Sterling's a firm called Hartwell and Associates Infrastructure Risk Advisory. A letter that was professionally written and contained a number that represented roughly 4 times what Ethan had made in any single year of his previous career. On Friday, Sterling's formal offer arrived. It was as Sterling had warned, a number he had worked hard to beat, and it showed. On Saturday morning, Ethan sat at his kitchen table with both letters in front of him and a cup of coffee that was still hot, and he thought about what he actually wanted, not what he was supposed to want. Not what the arc of the story suggested he should choose, not what would make the most sense to someone reading his life from the outside. What he actually specifically wanted. What? He wanted to do work that mattered. He knew that. That had never been in question. The 6 years of stripped-down survival hadn't changed. It had in some ways clarified it, the way removing everything non-essential clarifies what was always load-bearing. He wanted Emma to grow up watching a man who had not surrendered the thing that made him himself, even when surrendering it would have been so much easier. He wanted to be the kind of person that the next Marcus, the next 19-year-old standing in a corridor with a napkin in his hand, searching for words that would make it stop, would have someone willing to walk across 20 feet for them. He picked up Sterling's letter. He picked up his phone and called Sterling. "I have a condition," he said when Sterling picked up. "Tell me." "I want an independent whistleblower protection protocol built into my contract. Not the standard legal language, a specific funded, independently administered mechanism that applies not just to my own work, but to any analyst in my team who surfaces concerns through proper channels. If someone finds something and brings it forward correctly, they are protected structurally, not just nominally. A pause. That's an unusual request. I know why those words are unusual, Ethan said. I lived through what happens when that protection exists on paper and not in practice. I won't work in a structure where I can't guarantee the same thing doesn't happen to someone on my team. A longer pause. Give me 48 hours to have legal draft the language. If I can make it work structurally, and I believe I can do, we have an agreement. Yes, Ethan said. We have an agreement. He hung up and sat with the 2 letters on the table and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has negotiated for something that matters rather than something that merely pays and gotten both. The twist came on a Monday. 9 days after the gala. Ethan was in Sterling's building. Not the 7th floor, the executive floor. Now a different conference room with a different quality of light reviewing preliminary documentation for a new project when Calloway called. Victoria Blackwell has requested a meeting, she said. He didn't respond immediately. Through what channel? Her personal attorney. Not the Blackwell corporate team. They've distanced themselves from both Edmund and Victoria completely. Her personal attorney acting on her behalf individually. A pause. She's asking for 45 minutes of your time. No agenda in writing, just a meeting. Why would I agree to that? You wouldn't have to, Calloway said. I'd be present. Her attorney would be present. It would be fully documented. She has no legal leverage here. She's facing federal charges, and her attorney knows it. This would be entirely on your terms. Calloway paused. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what she wants, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and the request is unusual enough that I'm curious, and I think you might be too. He was. Set it up, he said. They met at Calloway's office, which was the correct neutral ground. Ruth Calloway's territory. Ruth Calloway's rules. Ruth Calloway's particular brand of silence that filled a room the way good architecture does. Victoria arrived with her personal attorney, a man named Gregory Ashe, who wore the careful expression of a lawyer who has recently had a very difficult week. Victoria herself was dressed simply, not the dark architectural choices of her public persona, something quieter. She looked, Ethan thought, like a person who had been stripped of a costume they'd worn long enough to mistake for their actual face. She sat across from him. Ashe sat beside her. Calloway sat beside Ethan. Victoria looked at Ethan directly. I'm not going to ask you to do anything, she said. I want to be clear about that from the beginning. I'm not here to make a deal or propose a negotiation. My attorney advised me not to come at all. She glanced briefly at Ashe, who confirmed this with a slight nod and an expression of resigned professionalism. I came anyway. Ethan waited. I want to understand something, Victoria said. At the gala, that first night with the boy Marcus, you didn't know anything about me then. You didn't know about the investigation about Sterling, about any of it. You were carrying a tray, and you set it down and walked over. She held his gaze. Why? Meh. He looked at her for a moment. It was, he realized, a genuine question. Not strategic, not legal, not tactical. She had come here to ask him something real, because it was something she actually needed to understand. Because he was frightened, Ethan said. And everyone in that room could see it, and nobody moved. That's it. That's it. She was quiet for a moment. You lost everything the first time, she said. Not because you were wrong, because you were right, and nobody moved then either. Yes. And you still walked across the room. Yes. She absorbed that. Something moved across her face that he couldn't fully read, too complicated, too interior, too much happening behind it to name from the outside. She looked down at the table for a moment, and when she looked back up, something had shifted. Not remorse exactly. He didn't know if remorse was something she had access to, and he wasn't going to decide that for her. But something honest, something that had stopped performing. The school, she said. In the Bronx. I knew about the building. I didn't know there was a school inside it. She said it quietly. I don't know if that matters. It matters to the children, Ethan said. It doesn't change the legal situation. I know that. A pause. I know that. Ash put a hand briefly on her arm, the careful gesture of a lawyer communicating that they had reached the edge of what was advisable, and Victoria straightened, and the meeting ended 3 minutes later, with nothing resolved and nothing exchanged, except the thing she had actually come for, which was not a resolution, but a reckoning. A moment of looking directly at the specific human being on the other side of everything she had built and dismantled. Ethan walked out of Calloway's office into the October afternoon and stood on the sidewalk and thought about what he felt about that conversation. What he felt was this complicated, human, neither satisfied nor guilty about being satisfied. The specific adult, unresolved quality of a thing that doesn't end cleanly, because the truth is that nothing ends cleanly, that consequences are real and necessary, and still leave behind them the complicated wreckage of actual lives, and that sitting with that complexity is part of what it means to have taken it seriously in the first place. He walked toward the subway. He had dinner to make. 3 weeks later, Emma gave her horse versus dogs presentation to her class. Ethan had taken the morning off, a thing he was still learning how to do. Taking time off, allowing the work to exist without him for a few hours, and sat in a small plastic chair at the back of the classroom with 11 other parents. Emma stood at the front with a printed graph, 3 color-coded index cards, and the particular composure of a person who has done the research and trusts what it says. My original hypothesis was that dogs are smarter than horses, she began, because that was my instinct. But instinct isn't evidence, so I looked for evidence, and what I found was more complicated than my hypothesis. She looked at her graph. Horses have significantly better long-term memory and spatial mapping ability. Dogs have higher social and emotional intelligence and adaptive problem-solving in human contexts. So the answer to the question of which animal is smarter depends entirely on what kind of smart you're measuring. She looked at the class. I changed my conclusion because the evidence told me to. I think that's the most important thing I learned from this project. Not which animal is smarter, but that you have to be willing to change your mind when the evidence is clear, even if you liked your first answer better. The class applauded. Sophie apparently applauded the loudest. Ethan sat in his plastic chair at the back of the room and did not trust himself to speak for a moment. The teacher, a young woman named Ms. Flores, who had clearly been won over completely, said, Emma, that was excellent. Where did you learn to think that way? Emma thought about it for a second. Then she looked at the back of the room. My dad, she said. Yeah. He drove her to school the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning that followed the same way he had driven her every morning for the last 6 years. Lunch-packed homework, checked radio on low. The particular rhythm of a morning that belongs specifically to a parent and a child, and the quiet, unremarkable ordinary, that is when you look at it clearly, the whole point of everything else. One morning stopped at a red light. Emma said, Daddy, do you miss it? Miss what? The waiter job. He thought about that honestly. I miss James, he said. He was a decent man. Will you go back and visit? Probably not. That chapter is finished. She considered this. Is the new chapter better? Different, he said. Better in some ways, the same in the ways that matter. What ways matter? He thought about a room that had laughed, about a boy named Marcus, about 6 pages of legal pad notes made at midnight while a city slept, about a folder on a coffee shop table and the specific click of a problem coming into focus for the first time in 6 years. About a little girl in star pajamas running at full speed, doing work that's true, he said. Being someone you can look yourself in the eye about. Making sure the people who are frightened have somebody willing to walk across the room. Emma thought about this for approximately 4 seconds, which was, he had learned her standard processing time for things she intended to file permanently. "That's 3 things," she said. "Yes." "Okay." She looked out the window. "I think I'm going to be a forensic accountant." He looked at her. "Yeah. Or a code breaker. I'm still gathering data." The light turned green, and he drove his daughter to school on a clear October morning, and the city moved around them the way it always did, enormous and continuous and indifferent to any individual story within it, and Ethan Carter was not invisible in it anymore. Not because the city had changed, and not because the people in it had changed, but because he had stopped allowing the judgment of people who could not see him to determine what he was. He had been called just a poor single dad by people who believed that phrase settled something. It had settled nothing. What settled it was a boy with a napkin and 20 feet of floor and a choice made in half a second that changed the direction of everything that followed. What settled it was 3 weeks of midnight work and a compliance calendar and a federal building conference room and a woman in a corridor who had looked at him with recognition and then looked away. What settled it was the specific, non-heroic, continuous, exhausting, necessary choice to keep going when stopping would have been so much easier.
Hindi mo mikinti.
And what settled it most completely? What settled it in the way that actually matters? In the place where a man knows what he's made of, was a little girl in Blue Star pajamas running at full speed across a front step, trusting completely that he would catch her. He had. He always would. That was the whole story. That had always been the whole story. Not the empire that fell, but the man who refused to.